Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Radically Rural. I'm Juliana Dodson, the Radically Rural Director. If you're joining us virtually, go ahead and let us know who you are and where you're from in the chat. This is the 4th year that the Hannah Grimes Center for Entrepreneurship and the Keene Sentinel have worked together to organize this event, which originally stemmed from Connect, a gathering of key supporters and graduates of Hannah Grimes programming 15 years ago this year. Radically Rural revolves around ideas, and that's why we put seeds in each of your bags. We want the ideas you plant here to grow, and please share it with us when they do. A few housekeeping items. Most importantly, we have 2 amazing women here with birthdays today. Our Hula Hoop Jam attendee Liz and our track leader Mary. Would you please wave your hand if you're here? Let's give a big round of applause to these women and be sure to tell them happy birthday throughout the day. Even for in-person attendees, we recommend downloading the Socio app to get information, play the game, and connect with virtual attendees. Something cool is that if you have your location services turned on, you can shake your phone and see other attendees who may be interested in connecting as well, even if they're hundreds of miles away. So give it a try throughout the summit and see how that works. If you have your sessions open on your phone while in person to interact with the chat, please be sure your volume is turned all the way down. If you have questions or need help at any time, look for someone with a yellow lanyard like this, or stop by the Hannah Grimes Marketplace. Be sure to turn in your lanyards before you leave, as we want to reduce waste and reuse them next year. We did not put the mixers and live music in the online agenda, but please take a close look at the printed program for those. We've had lots of exciting local businesses participation to help make these happen and would love for you to enjoy them. We switched the location of the land and community and healthcare tracks, so healthcare is now here at UCC in the parlor room, and land and community is in Cohen Hall at the library. Many of our speakers have changed to virtual. If you attend a track with low in-person speakers, please recognize that this is a combination of the tragedy of an ongoing pandemic, as well as the incredible benefit that comes from having the technology to include those that could otherwise not be there. Speaking of incredible, this year's summit is an extremely complex event produced by a true grassroots effort. Please exercise much patience and understanding as we navigate this hybrid situation. We already have our dates for next year, September 21st and 22nd. Registration will be open next week at a steep discount, 50%, so keep an eye out for that. Now the fun part, gratitude. This might not be everyone's favorite part of opening remarks, but it matters, and here's why. This is how rural works, right? We oftentimes rely heavily on volunteers and community partnerships to do what we do. I'll start by thanking our amazing sponsors. Our top-level sponsorships are made possible by the generous gifts of the TD Charitable Foundation and the Knight Foundation. Some of you may recognize the Knight Foundation funding because that is actually supporting your presence here with us today. The funds from the Knight Foundation are bringing us 6 in-person journalists and up to 45 virtual. Now here's what's cool. Not 1, but 2 of those attendees here volunteered their time to help with event setup yesterday. How amazing is that? This is how we build community. Our track sponsors are the Putnam Foundation, the Caterpillar Lab, Mascoma Bank, Cheshire Medical Center, Eversource, and Franklin Pierce University Marlin Fitzwater Center for Communication. Just a fun note on one of those, not only has Franklin Pierce sponsored financially, but the student journalists are covering today's event and will help the Sentinel produce a tab tomorrow on today's conversations. They have also gone above and beyond to help us with our streaming efforts.
Our gold sponsors are CNS, Savings Bank of Walpole, New Hampshire PBS, and Consolidated Communications. And here's a story for you on this level of sponsorship, just to show that our sponsors are not simply financial donors, but they are also partners. Just a few days ago, we discovered a connection issue at our Main Street location. We worked with Consolidated Communications, one of our sponsors, and Cheshire County, and they installed a special fiber hookup just for us, just in the nick of time. This was a huge lift on short notice and again illustrates the importance of partnerships. Our silver sponsors are Cummings Publication Printers and Fenton Family Dealerships. I want to take a moment to deeply thank our local businesses and organizations who have supported us, such as the Community Workshop, who is hosting a virtual mixer at 1 p.m. You will notice in your registration information, you should have gotten this packet right here. And this lists just the tip of the iceberg of all of the organizations and businesses in the area who have participated with us in this process. On the first and second page, there are coupons that you can use at local businesses. If you're using any of these, you can simply show it to them, they'll cross it off the list, and you can keep going with the next one. Please take a moment to read through these and appreciate with us all the efforts of our community partners. Now, this is a big one. We want to thank our track leaders, Amanda, Dawn, Sarah, Jess, Mary, Rick, Sharon, and Terry. Since January, these volunteers have worked to curate ideas and craft sessions that they believe have the power to transform economies and life in small towns and rural regions around the country. In the process, they've passionately wrestled with ideas and pursued new networks. And they've juggled schedules and learned the back end of the Socio platform and helped us produce a hybrid event. And they have been gracious, generous, and supportive. We couldn't possibly thank them enough, but we look forward, along with you, to enjoying what they have put together for us. I would also like to thank our roughly 75 speakers who have given your time and talents to be with us here, either in person or virtually. I want to thank the staff of the Hannah Grimes Center and the Keene Sentinel. Most importantly, Marion, Terry, Gina, and Jenya. They have gone so far above and beyond. And our volunteers. Although all of them deserve recognition by name, I'll specifically mention Eileen Sarson and Stephen Worley, who have just done incredible things to help us out of the goodness of their hearts. Now, I would like to introduce Latin American music duo Carioca, Jose Lescano and Marcia Leninger. How's this one? Better? Okay. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Sarah Rocker. She is a rural sociologist and independent consultant. She holds a doctorate in rural sociology and a master's in public administration with a focus on domestic food systems policy. Sarah's work focuses on entrepreneurial, place-based development through the lens of food systems. In particular, she researches and consults on agri-food value chain coordination strategies that build capacity for small and mid-scale producers, processors, and markets, and foster rural and urban connections. She is passionate about sharing information on the power of networks as a research practice and applied tool for building thriving community-based economies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sarah Rocker.
Good morning. So I recognize that we're going to have both a virtual audience and a physical audience. I'm just going to connect to the virtual audience in just one moment here on the computer. Okay. Thank you so much.
Good job, Sarah.
Good job, everybody. Hybrid conferences, I've heard, are not 1 1/2 times the work, they're more than double. So thank you again to your organizers for the incredible work. So I say good morning to the physical and the virtual audience. I am delighted to be speaking to you today on a talk about something that I've been very passionate about for over 15 years. It is my aim to share at least 3 main takeaways with you today. And that is around, first, the concept of social or soft infrastructure as a critical element for development. And for those that already are familiar with that term, I hope that I might be able to inspire you with something a little bit new. And for those who have not heard this term, I hope that you walk away realizing this is a very critical tool for your community and economic development pocket. The second is that I'd like to inspire you with impacts and innovations that I've seen from networks in action from applied work in the field, as well as the research I've been conducting over the past 10 years in rural communities. And finally, I'd like to leave you with a little something for your toolkits regarding strategies for building networks with shared purpose and values in your home communities, sectors, and fields. So for the past decade, my passion as a rural sociologist, I've been fascinated with the concept of social infrastructure and formal and informal networks. However, most of my expertise is in food systems, but what I believe is important to note is that I think the concepts transcend any one sector and really is fundamental to development at a local and regional level writ large. My interest began in this, quite literally in a field, this particular field that you're seeing right here, when I was farming 14 years ago on a small vegetable and flower farm in my former home of Washington State. I noticed that challenges that our farm was having regarding trying to tend the land in a regenerative way while producing nutritious and affordable food for our community and earning a living wage for our family and our business. Why was it so challenging to do good by our land, by the community, for ourselves? The challenges I observed on our farm was what I also saw in other small farmers in our region and other food businesses. And this really got me curious. It got me curious about further back in the history of our South Sound region. And I heard that decades ago, there had been local infrastructure that was once in place, like farmer-owned cooperatives and distribution centers and canneries and processing facilities, and a prevalence of small markets, regional connection. Even places for farmers to meet used to be wildly popular. And yet I would drive by buildings like this, near abandoned granges and old canneries and buildings that were no longer in use, even though I thought we could use them. My curiosity led me to learn a lot more about the history of the globalized food system, about how the policies in the past 50 years supported industrialization and the centralization of food and agriculture. And I started going to meetings, and I met other farmers who were curious about the same thing. And we saw the opportunity to start to organize collectively for more support. One could say that with this new passion and my new farmer friends who were also curious, we sprang into action. That looked like joining with other farmers and hosting work parties and tool sharing on each other's farms, repopulating the Grange meetings, joining a local food policy council, and in my case, I also helped to co-found a local farmers market for small farmers like ourselves. Quite literally, I think you can see my enthusiasm here of springing into action, as that is actually me in a strawberry suit on the opening day of the farmers market that we founded. My curiosity also took me down the path of formal research, where I went to school embarking on a master's in public administration on US food system policy. And this here is a report that came out of my very first project, which was my thesis. And I was asking, what were the barriers of local farms to selling at the local markets in our community? Why wasn't that happening? Why didn't we see farm fresh food in our schools, in our hospitals, in our restaurants? And eventually, I took that question and it evolved into a larger one of what makes small community, business, and local economy thrive anywhere. And that is what I took into my PhD work as a rural sociologist. And for the past decade, I haven't stopped investigating that. So going back to my very first research question in my own home community in Washington State, I discovered a really important component that I noticed was missing in the community that I was living and farming in. And that is the concept of infrastructure. Through over a year of interviews with other farmers, restaurant owners, chefs, hospital directors, food policy makers, I learned that this area used to have a robust regional food system, including tool and equipment sharing, aggregation and preserving facilities, farmer-owned co-ops, and even distribution trucks that were all going to shared markets. But when I embarked on this research back in 2009, it had all but disappeared. But there was something else that was missing just beyond the trucks and the warehouses. Relationships had also eroded. No longer did farmers have the opportunity to meet and discuss the needs for tools, equipment, or even the weather. Also, the chefs that we interviewed Even though they espoused to want to buy local, and this was kind of in the earlier days of the farm to table movement, they really didn't even know where to begin meeting a farmer, let alone what kind of produce grew in our region and what season it was available. I realized then that the challenges that we had in our community would not be solved by a new fancy warehouse or a fleet of refrigerated trucks. I became aware of a different type of scaffolding that needed to be reconstructed, and that was in the form of knowledge and relationships and rapport and collaboration. Farmers needed to meet other farmers, chefs needed to meet other chefs, they all needed to meet each other, and a host of technical assistance providers like funders, policymakers, extension, and researchers who also wanted to help needed to get connected to these folks and businesses who needed their support. So in this first research project, we wondered how we could make a difference with all the data we had gathered. We wanted to know how we could help to build the infrastructure that needed to be in place. So we decided to gather all of our data and host a really big event. We called it the South Sound Farm to Fork, and we invited every person that we interviewed and surveyed, including farmers, restaurateurs, chefs, and technical assistance providers like nonprofits and researchers and state agencies who all wanted to have a better food system in the South Sound. We presented our results, then we served delicious local food, and we created the opportunity for connection to be formed at this event. People were invited under the goal of a stronger, more connected local economy. And these are images from some of the press that we received from this event. The outcome of this event was really amazing. The group decided on 3 priorities. And what's really interestingly, it was to work on cultivating social infrastructure first. They knew that there was a need for a stronger network to meet more regularly and share ideas, equipment, resources, and assistance and the like. The second was to make better use of what's already there. And that's getting creative about repurposing things like old grange halls or county fairgrounds or local churches that actually had things like processing kitchens that could be utilized. Finally, and only after these 2 things happened, the idea was to build new. So this is where ideas like a new food aggregation center would come in, but only to fill new gaps that weren't being met by the first 2. So I'm really, really happy to report that 7 years later, by 2020, I actually received a phone call from the county economic development staff in Thurston County. And they reached out to me and shared that the community had indeed followed this plan. They had established by 2020 a Southwest Washington farmers-owned cooperative. They had built and now had fully operating a food aggregation and distribution hub, aggregating local produce together. And they broke ground just last year on an even bigger processing facility that the county is funding with expanded indoor value-added product processing and new indoor retail market location. The county credits this initial farmer-buyer meeting back in 2013 for planting the seeds of what is now bearing fruit. So I'm gonna share now a story from a bit earlier, or rather a bit later, and this is from a different region in the United States. This is the Mid-Atlantic, in which I worked with a group of farmers and brewers and maltsters. By the way, maltster was a word that I learned in my research. It's someone who makes malt, as well as distillers and bakers. All of these people who were super excited about small grains. And in this particular project, there was a really neat collaboration created an opportunity for a new product innovation. Now in this case, a brewer, a maltster, and a distiller all walk into a room. By the way, this is not the start of a joke. But a conversation and a handshake later. And a Belgian quad beer brewed with local malt and aged in whiskey barrels appears. Now this is incredibly novel because typically distillers go to distilling conferences and the brewers go to their brewing conventions and bakers and so on. But this particular group had a vision, and that was to bring people together who had never before met, who all loved locally adapted small heritage grains and the use of handcrafted malt to make new collaborations and a whole lot of new delicious drinks and products for people to enjoy. So here is yet a list of all the other kinds of illustrative kinds of impacts that came from this type of event. I don't have time to tell you every story or every delicious product, but you can learn more about it by going to Philly Grain and Malt Symposium if you'd like to check out some of the goodies. In another social network map here, I mapped how geographically connections were being made, and regional business clustering is one thing that also happens from these kinds of networking events. So do new product innovations, new partners, access to new research, funding, and support. And a really big thing is that collaboration and new networks create less risk and more strategic growth overall. So now I'm going to turn to a final research example. And in this one, this is just from last year, so quite recent. And this is a really interesting national example in which I had the opportunity to be on a research team sponsored by the US Department of Agriculture, who put a call out to investigate how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted local and regional food system sectors across the nation. And in this research, we engaged with 17 different sectors. These included different market channels like farmers markets, restaurants, groceries, produce auctions, community-supported agriculture, different niche commodities like seafood, small grains, and meat, and also different populations like policy and Black and Indigenous farmers. In this research, we conducted listening sessions for the first 2 months right after quarantine, and we learned about the initial disruptions that were impacting local and regional food system sectors. And we listened for this for 17 different sectors, and then we conducted a lot of household consumer survey data over the course of several months. And every month, we would meet with the industry sectors and share with them sort of data bites about what we were finding. We put it all on this public website so that the public could also follow along. And we turned our research into little snapshots, whether they were webinars or little impact assessments about how the sector was being disrupted, or innovation briefs about silver linings of really cool things that were unexpected that came from the pandemic. What was really unique is that by meeting every single month for 12 months with these sector leaders, we were giving them the data back. We were also giving them a chance to keep talking with each other and checking in about how the pandemic was ongoing affecting them. And they started to build this cross-sector network that had never before been established. Now, the power of networks showed up in many ways in this particular project. So we knew that supply chains were massively disrupted. And when we listened to the stories about how innovation and adaptation happened, a theme emerged. And that was that networks were consistently referenced as being leveraged in adaptations and pivots to the pandemic. Now, this next slide here is one of our members, who is the National Association for State Departments of Agriculture. And they shared about how existing networks were activated in emergency response. So when food supply chains shut down and there were no markets for the food to go to from the farms, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture worked with existing relationships with food banks and nonprofits. They were able to funnel surpluses very quickly into food banks while also paying farmers for their goods, mitigating farm loss and saving businesses. This is just one tiny example of networks in action in crisis. Now, at another level, our project itself forged this new network of cross-sector relationships. And this is the final network map that you will be seeing tonight. Again, more dots and lines. I know it doesn't look scientific, but I promise there's science in there. But what we were really interested in is how the sectors that were part of our project knew each other before the pandemic. And so we asked them all the different ways that they worked together and who was connected to whom. And so you're just seeing a little snapshot of what that looked like. We tracked this over time, and that looks like this. Again, showing you data to know that we did it, but not to go into the depths of it. But what it resulted in, I'm going to leave you with one last illustrative sort of example from this question. And my illustration here actually comes in the form of a question to the group, which is not another joke, by the way. But what does a loaf of bread and a fish stick have in common? So to answer this, I would like to introduce you to two of our sector partners a little more deeply. The first is the Bread Lab Collective. Now this is a group of bakers and millers and researchers and students who are on a mission to promote the most amazing whole wheat, affordable bread for sandwiches in particular for every community. The Bread Lab started a movement sharing a recipe that has been tried and tested in the Washington State University laboratory, and it is open source recipe that home cooks and bakers all around the country can make with whole wheat, no filler, and it's an approachable bread that anyone can use and is very affordable, under $6. They also work to do grain trials with farmers to grow the best kind of varieties to make this affordable bread, who sell it to millers who provide flours for the recipes. Professional bakeries who use this free online recipe are asked to contribute 10 cents per loaf back to the Bread Lab so that additional research for varieties and baking adaptations can continue. This has caught on like wildfire, especially with the home baking craze in the pandemic. How many of you here had a baby bread loaf at home? Yeah. Approachable loaf, I recommend this recipe. So this, in tandem with one of our other partners that I'd just like to quickly introduce, this is the Local Catch Network. These are the seafood industry network that we worked with, which is comprised of fishermen and women, researchers, organizations, and technical assistance providers who really want to support sustainable small-scale seafood. Now, the seafood industry took a massive hit in the pandemic, especially because so much of seafood goes into restaurant channels that is very specially prepared, such as oysters that need to be shucked, or lobsters that need to be prepared in delicate ways, or cooking a fish just right. And so most home consumers weren't buying those kind of things because that was a bit daunting for them. So inspired by what they had learned from the Bread Lab sharing in our network meetings, Local Catch got together, talked with the Bread Lab, picked their brain, and a new innovation is now being born: the Approachable Fish Stick. This incorporates a recipe that uses locally caught regional seafood. This product is minimally processed, and it is affordable and very easy to cook for the home consumer. So I share these examples not to sort of give all of the work that has happened, but to really give you a taste of just the benefits that I have seen over time from networks. And here's a word cloud of how our food industry partners felt at the end of 12 months of network building with our COVID-19 project. And I'll share that now this project is going into a second year. It's having its participation of the network expanded even more to bring in new industry partners. And they are working on two new projects. One is creating a resiliency playbook of adaptations that all local food systems can use to be more resilient to future shocks. And the second is a new advocacy work group for Farm Bill 2023, advocating for local food. So now I turn to the present moment, and I turn to you all in this physical audience and the virtual audience. So I'm passionate about networks because I've seen them work time and time again, and quite literally serve as nets that work to build, to innovate, to empower, to support, especially in times of crisis and disruption. I'm excited now to turn this last part of the talk to a few strategies of what you might consider in building networks in your own communities. While it might seem initially daunting to make sense of the universe of possibilities of where to begin with forging new relationships, I'd like to share what I believe to be an important theme on my research in networks that I believe leads to successful and lasting outcomes. Networks, I believe, are most successful when they have a clear articulation of a shared goal or purpose. Naming of the goal or purpose helps to catalyze and draw in those around you to participate in a meaningful way that is something bigger than just one's day-to-day job responsibilities. In the examples that I've shared from the research, Very diverse networks were catalyzed around big tent goals and ideas, such as increasing the local production of affordable food, or growing the small grain or local foods economy, or pandemic resilience planning or response. Now, it's not that individual participants or farmers didn't come into these networks thinking, what's in it for me? Or I'm just here to sell some veggies, or I want to meet new customers. Of course they did, and that's totally fine. Networks are supremely powerful in their ability that they help both personal and individual, as well as collective goals. And they have the capacity to address short-term goals while also addressing collective long-term systemic issues. Being in conversation about what we do and why we do it helps to address both. So, where to begin? It begins with an invitation, I believe, to reflect personally, and in particular on your purpose of what you are working towards in the world. So I invite you to think about this question as expansively as you can. Think about what might be your big tent. As we prepare to engage in a robust program over the next 2 days, there's going to be ample time to connect with amazing contacts. For example, at the Connect event tonight, and for our virtual participants, this is where there's a public wall enabled in the Socio app to facilitate some similar opportunities to share. And so I hope you'll take advantage of that. And plus, I even heard there's games with prizes if you do this on the virtual app. So, as you've considered that first question of your big purpose, you can use this opportunity at Radically Rural to share your big tent idea, to meet others with similar goals and values, and exchange resources that you have or you need. Instead of meeting someone and saying, so what do you do? And sort of frequently eliciting that response of, this is my job title, perhaps think about sort of reframing to, so what are you passionate about? Or what core values guide your work? And don't forget to mention if you have a need or request. For example, I'm working on X, and what I need at this time is this to accomplish my goal. I have watched this kind of exercise work successfully time and time again, and it is incredible how much we have to offer each other if we just take a moment to prompt the conversation to realize where we can be of mutual support. I want to offer one final prompt, which is really more of a takeaway and a lasting reflection as you go home to your community and your sector as well. But it's a priority that I believe is paramount at this time. And that is that when you consider your own networks in your communities and fields, and you think about the representation in the network and which voices are present and which are not. I believe the pandemic has created an incredibly humbling pause for many of us to reflect on systems that have failed, while also recognizing broader systems that have been failing entire populations throughout our nation's history. In this present moment, as we reflect on the nation's priority of recovery and building better beyond, I think we have an opportunity to center equity at the heart of this work, and that begins with building inclusive networks. And that can start with something as simple as using your access or your perspective or your privilege to weave in those who you see who are on the periphery. I close with this final quote, which is that collaboration, I believe, is the world's most renewable resource. I hope you leave this session inspired about how to use it, how to grow it, and be amazed by what it yields at this conference and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was wonderful. So we have about 10 minutes until 10 o'clock, so feel free to stay, enjoy the music until 10 o'clock. And if you take a look back to the back of the church right now, we have some fine-looking gentlemen in the red shirts and yellow lanyards who are going to be helping the 5 tracks that are not taking place in the church to find their locations for the first time. So please follow them. They will have a sign for the tracks where they are going.
Juliana, thank you for all of your work for this event these 2 days.
The old songs, those good old songs for me. I love to hear those minor chords and the close harmony. Down our way, both night and day, you know everybody and they all know you. And even policemen say, how do you do? Pals by the score and gals galore, and that old gang of mine, they sang Sweet Adeline. Down our way, down our way.
So thank you for all your help. Thank you for all the work and actually for all of the people who put so much time and energy into this.
You know, it's often the person who organizes the event who is thanking everybody and doesn't get thanked. So thank you from every level, whether you've traveled here to attend the event, whether you're sitting at home and listening to the ideas. This is all about ideas and rural communities. And I called Steve yesterday afternoon and said, can you do this? And some extra guys got wrangled up. It's how rural communities do things. And the volunteers for this year's event, doing a hybrid event is very complicated. We've done it in person. We've done it online, but to do both is really hard. We've got tech teams at 7 locations today, and that has all been organized by Juliana and her team. And it's you know, really a great thing to have under our belt for the future. And next year, you know, like people from all over the country can attend, whether they can be here or not. So we're really grateful for that, but we're really grateful for the patience of all of our volunteers, our staff, all of you attending as we learn how to do this new great thing. So thank you all. Enjoy the day. Thank you.
Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. Let me hear you whisper that you love me too. Keep the love light glowing in your eyes so true. Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. With you.